Welcome to Kensington Market. So I thought I'd continue my journey through Toronto to show you some of the more popular tourist destinations. So if you decide to come here, I want to give you some idea of where you might want to go and what you might want to do. So today I am in Kensington Market, which is, I would say, one of the top tourist destinations you would want to come to if you were to visit Toronto for the first time, or even if you were a repeat visitor. I would say, still come to Kensington Market. It's located right downtown, and it is one of the oldest and still pretty authentic places that you can visit that is not very commercial. It's mostly shops like this, which are like a lot of used vintage apparel and clothing. Here we have one of the oldest ones here. You can see Courage My Love. It's been here, at least from what I could remember, it's been here since the 80s. I remember visiting this shop as early as 1980. But it was quite different then. It's not what it is today. And as you can see all along the street here, we are actually on Kensington Avenue. There's quite a few shops, used clothing stores, and other types of shops selling pretty cheap stuff. If you come here, it's not expensive. It's pretty budget friendly. The restaurants are a different thing. The restaurants here, I believe this one here, I've been here before. It's a kind of Mexican bar with tapas. And that one's a little bit more expensive. So the restaurants are, I know there's a smoothie place up the street there called Organic Press, and that, there you're going to pay $12 to $16 for a smoothie. So it's not cheap. Anyways, let's go up here, and I'll try to take you through the market. And while I take you through the market, I'm going to talk about some of the other places you probably might want to visit if you come to Toronto. So some of the places I would consider visiting. Well, if you're into galleries and museums, I would definitely go visit the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario. Again, it's located centrally downtown. It's got quite a nice collection of art. I mean, it's not what I would consider to be like world class. I mean, I've lived in New York, and I've been to all the galleries there, and I'm pretty familiar with the artwork in New York City. But the AGO is still worth a visit. There's a nice collection of Canadian artwork, paintings from the Group of Seven. So if you're into the Group of Seven, I think that would be a really good choice to visit and see some of their artwork. If you're into Henry Moore, he's got quite a collection of sculpture there. Also, they have about one or two rotating contemporary shows. The last one I think I went to was called the Leonard Cohen show, which featured a Canadian artist, Leonard Cohen, and his history and music and so forth. So there's always something going on. I would check their website. The other is the ROM, which is the Royal Ontario Museum, which again is very central, downtown, all very close together. And the ROM has a really nice collection of dinosaurs and other artifacts Central Asia, China, India, Egypt. It used to have a mummy. I'm not sure if it still does. So if you have kids or if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would say the ROM is a good choice. Outside those two, I think across the street from the ROM is a museum called the Ceramics Museum or the Textile Museum. I think it's the Textile Museum where they have textiles. So if you're into textiles, that might be worth a visit. I'm not sure if there's a ceramics museum. I'll have to check on that. So those are the kind of museum gallery places I would consider if you're visiting Toronto. The others would be landmarks. So Kensington Market. This place I'm in right now, it's Sunday. It's quite hectic, quite busy. I say it's worth a visit. You'd probably want to take transit to get here. Toronto is pretty transit friendly, and you should be able to easily navigate your way through Toronto using the Toronto Transit. And again, Kensington Market is centrally located downtown. It's right next to Chinatown, and it's a very vibrant landmark full of hustle and bustle. And definitely well worth the visit. The only thing I would caution is if you're bringing kids to be a little careful because there's a lot of commotion here, and just keep them close to you. Crime-wise, it's pretty safe. I've never really had an issue here. I've never seen anything. There are, obviously, because of its nature, it does attract a lot of marginal type people because of its low income neighborhood. Now things are changing, but this used to be a pretty unattractive, undesirable landmark. But now it's become kind of more popularized, and there's a lot more people coming here now. Especially because there's shops here that people like to come to, certain bakeries, certain meat shops that become quite popular, cheese shops, and people come here to buy their groceries and so forth. So I think this is a destination, and there's a lot to see. There's a lot to wander. I mean, the other thing about this place, it's very authentic in the same way that you might find, some other market from an older city, like, markets in India, markets in Europe. It has that feel of being less commercial, like an open air kind of market. And there's a lot of things for you to do and buy here. Trinkets mostly. Don't expect, like this kind of stuff. Jewelry. Maybe little gifts to bring back. Pizzerias are here. There's a lot of Mexican restaurants here. A cheese shop here. This one's called Cheese Magic.
Do you like color coordinating, or do you like many colors?
I try to make sure the colors at least kind of make sense together.
I do have to say, over the last few years, this market has changed quite considerably, and it's become much more, I would call, gentrified, and I believe within the next 10 years it's going to become even more gentrified. So if you want to see this market in a more raw form, I would say come see it sooner rather than later. There's some fish stores, Sea Kings. So this used to be called the fish market, believe it or not. This place has been here forever. It's called Tom's Place. He sells suits. I think he's bought all these buildings along here. And he's been here, like the sign says, for 50 years. When I came here in the late 60s, and my parents used to shop here, this was what people would call the Jewish market, because the majority of the people here were Jewish. So you'd have a lot of the shop owners. Oh yeah, there's the fish, another fish market. A lot of the this one I think is a Peruvian restaurant that sells Peruvian food. Got some barbecue here. Buenos dias. So yeah, so it was mostly a Jewish market. Jewish stores where you buy chickens. I do remember as a kid seeing live chickens in crates and other ducks and so forth on the street. And I think they outlawed that in the 70s or 80s. So that had to be put in the back. You couldn't buy you couldn't buy like a live chicken anymore. Not anyways. So, but gradually, as the Jewish population here started aging and retiring, their children were not willing to take on the family business, and obviously their children were now educated and had degrees. They were lawyers and doctors, engineers, etc. They weren't interested in taking over a chicken shop or something like that. So gradually, those owners sold their businesses to the next generation of immigrants, which were literally the Portuguese. So this eventually became to be known, not the Jewish market, but it became to be known as the Portuguese market. And there's still quite a few Portuguese places here, like this restaurant here is called Amadeus, and it's a Portuguese restaurant that sells sardines and typical traditional Portuguese type food. And so the Portuguese inhabited this market for quite a while, I believe over 20 years. And then another generation started to take over the market, and that was the Vietnamese or Asian demographic. So a lot of the Portuguese started retiring or giving up the businesses, and the Asian population would start to move in and take over their businesses, and originally there was a lot more from what I remember, there was a lot more vegetable stores, fruit stores, grocery stores that sold all kinds of things like canned food and stuff like that. And those have gradually disappeared. You don't see many places selling groceries. There's maybe 4 or so. There's about 2 or 3 health food stores in the market. Right here we're in a park that's been recently renovated. It's actually pretty quiet today. Usually it's usually packed, but today it's actually pretty tame. So yeah, the Asians took over that market, and now it's what I've been seeing over the last 10 years is that it's pretty diversified, with a lot more of a younger generation moving in that are trying to bring in more contemporary type shops, like boutique shops, like a boutique fish store, or boutique bakery, trying to use that angle, which seems to be like the new approach to selling things in retail. A boutique cafe. There's now a couple of very kind of trendy cafes here. So you can buy like, $6, $7 lattes and stuff. So right in front of me here, you can see is a synagogue. And there are 2 synagogues in this market. Like I was saying before, the market was originally a large Jewish population, lived here, owned property here, and sold their goods here, and therefore there's a couple of synagogues here and they're still, from what I understand, they're still in operation. This one looks like it's in operation. They have a little garden here. It's very well kept. It's been really well taken care of. So yeah, there's two of those. And like I was saying, so now the market has become much more gentrified with trendy cafes and places for you to go to, little bars. At night it's become a bit of a night spot. And again, like 20 years ago, you would not come here at night. It was very crime ridden. It was full of drugs and drug dealers. And that's when the Vietnamese were sort of inhabiting this part of the market. And there was a lot of drug trade going through the Vietnamese. A small percentage, let's say, of the Vietnamese population. I guess we have an ambulance coming down the street, or a fire truck. I'm going to wait till it passes. So as I was saying before, the fire trucks came through. About 20 years ago, even up to 10 years ago, the market was not a very friendly night place. So some crime was happening here. Mostly it was drug related, and it was really off limits at night. Once it got dark, you didn't want to be here, and it was pretty desolate. I did have a girlfriend 30 years ago that lived on one of these streets, and I used to visit her, and I remember coming at night and like it was completely dead. But now that's not the case. Now you can come and at night, and there's many places to visit. Clubs, small bars with live entertainment, independent entertainment. You're going to see independent musicians. Here's a cool music store called Paul's Boutique, and I have bought some things here in the past. If you come to the market and you want to maybe purchase a musical instrument or look at musical instruments and so forth, I would recommend Paul's Boutique. Another cool bar here is Ronnie's. Come here on an afternoon and have a drink. It's pretty reasonable and a very interesting group of people. You will probably meet some interesting people. That's another thing about this place, Kensington Market, is you're going to meet some amazing people. Some very interesting people. People you would not normally meet in other landmarks or locations here in Toronto. So if you're willing to be open and ask questions and say hi and so forth, you gotta get out of here. I'm gonna get a copyright strike for that music, so I'm gonna vamoose from there. So you will meet some very interesting people here that you won't meet anywhere else, really. So moving on, if you're visiting Toronto, besides the typical landmarks like everyone would know about, the CN Tower is one of them. CN Tower is definitely a landmark you might want to visit, especially if you've never been there and you want to go up top high and see the city from on high. Then I would say CN Tower is definitely. Okay, so very busy, and I'm hearing music. And again, I don't want to get a copyright strike, so I'm going to vamoose out of here. And hopefully I won't get a copyright strike. It's very hard to not get a copyright strike when you're hearing music that you're not even really trying to play. But anyways, if YouTube hears it, it gives you a strike. So I don't want that to happen. So the CN Tower is an option for people, and I don't believe that option is cheap. I think that is a pricey option. Last time, I believe it was like $20 or $30 just to go up. And don't quote me on it, but do your research. If you want to eat there, it's even more. So have a look at that. Another location I would consider visiting if I came here to Toronto, and this would be a day trip. I would consider this to be a day trip, and that would be to go to Center Island. Now, for those of you who might not know, Toronto is on Lake Ontario. It's right on the lake. I think I'm just going to try and sit here for a minute. Talk to you guys. Toronto is on Lake Ontario. And right in front of the city, are a spit. It's like a man-made spit. I don't even think those islands are natural. I think they were created. Or at least some of it was created with sand. And I think they were created as a way to break the waves, so that to keep the harbor, the Toronto harbor, kind of wave free, because Toronto originally was a port where ships would come and distribute their goods all across Ontario. That no longer happens. It's like part of the history of Toronto. And I think that the spit was created as a way to keep the waves, to keep the bad inclement water from hitting the shores, and therefore make it easier for the boats and ships to come in and out. But now the Toronto Island is mostly used first as an airport. The west side of the island is Hanlon's Point, I believe, Hanlon's Point. That is all mostly taken over by what's called the Billy Bishop Airport, which I think the major airline is Porter, that flies in and out of here, small aircrafts. I've used them a lot to go to New York and places like Montreal, short distances, and other private planes like small, not jets per se, but small Cessnas. I mean, originally before Porter was there, it was just a very small, quiet little airport where people who had their little planes, their Cessnas and so forth, they would keep them there and fly them out of the airport. But now it's, Toronto's just way too overpopulated, too busy for that. So you have the airport on that side. The center area of the island is sort of where a lot of activities happen. The regattas, there's a place called Centerville, which is an amusement park full of rides. So if you have kids and you want to take them on a bit of a amusement adventure, I would consider that. And then there's the east side of the island called Ward's Island, which up to about 10 years ago or so was mostly just residential. There were like small cottage-like homes. You couldn't own the home, but what you did is you could own the property, but you didn't own the land. The city leased you the land, and you could buy the home. But it was a very strange arrangement, which ensured that you didn't actually own it, but you paid for it. But mostly those homes were inhabited by artists and writers who wanted to have this distance from the city and have this sort of peaceful existence away from the hustle and bustle on Toronto Island. Now a lot of those homes are old, or they're falling apart. They're probably got mold and not the healthiest places to live. And they are quite old now, so they're not really being renovated or anything. So that was mostly that side of it, Ward's Island. Also, Ward's Island was host to what is called the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. So it's a sort of a swanky club where you would have your yacht, which is basically a sailboat. There's no yachts here, so you're not going to see yachts in Toronto, but you will see large sailboats and so forth, and they'll be parked there. And if you're a member of that club, you can go there, and that's what a lot of people did here, especially if you didn't have a cottage. You would, instead of buying a cottage, consider joining one of these clubs. One is the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, and the other would be the Boulevard Club, which is on the west side here, still in Toronto, but like in the west side of the city along the lake. There's a club called the Boulevard Club, which again is sort of a yacht club. They got tennis and badminton, they have gyms, and I mean, the entrances to these clubs aren't cheap. They're like around $20,000 or $30,000 just to get in, and then there's like all these fees and so forth. So it is really for the elite. It's not for common people. But instead of buying a cottage, some people opt for this because it gives them a cottage-like experience in the city and without the expense and trouble of having a cottage. So yeah, Center Island, the Toronto Islands are a good option to visit. So the other landmark I would consider visiting, I'll just mention a couple here. One is the Brickworks. It's in town. It's the site of an old brick factory that's been converted into a very friendly, kind of eco-friendly place right in the city where you can go for these nature walks. And hopefully I'm going to take you guys there. But it's called the Toronto Brickworks. They usually have, on weekends, they have a farmer's market there, and there's all these walks and so forth and trails. So there's some cool things there. Casa Loma is another popular destination. It's an old castle. It's not old, it's been well kept, but it was built around the turn of the century. There's a story behind it. Someone financed it and then went bankrupt, and then somebody else had to take over. I'm not quite sure, but now it's been kind of turned into a destination where you can go watch theater, and there's events and so forth. So Casa Loma is another destination you might want to consider. Where else would I go here as far as landmarks? There is an area called the Distillery District in town, and it's in the east end of the city, and it used to be a bit of a factory district in the 30s, but as manufacturing and started leaving the city, that area became abandoned. It was almost torn down, but the beauty of it still had the cobblestone streets. It still had some very beautiful old architecture. So I guess somebody had the bright idea to revive it and make it a destination. So it's full of little boutiques, shops. There's some theaters there you might want to visit. So I would consider visiting the Distillery District as well when you're down here. There's an aquarium that you could visit in Toronto. It's not that old, it's pretty new. Ripley's Aquarium, so try to visit that. Hyde Park, I would consider a good destination. Again, that would be a nice half day. I would do that as a half day, and I would even maybe consider it as a picnic kind of destination. Make yourself a couple of sandwiches, and if you have a bicycle, it could be a really good destination for bicycle. And it's a pretty big park. Again, it used to be owned by somebody. It was given to some lord or some aristocrat, and he in turn donated it to the city at some point. And now it's a public park. It's quite nice to ride in. There is a public swimming pool. There are tennis courts there. There's a small restaurant in the middle there, it's not great. It's mostly burgers and fries. So I would consider bringing some sandwiches. And then, yes, also if you go to Hyde Park, you could also actually make your way down to the lake and visit the lakefront. So those are all things I would consider doing in the city. And if I forgot anything, let me know. Tell me if I did forget anything. In my next video, I'm going to, there's Dundas Square, which is near the Eaton Center. And what they've done with Dundas Square, which is right in the center of the city, is they try to recreate this sort of Times Square feel of New York City. I guess, the city felt like it needed like a central place people can see that felt like Times Square. So they created this Dundas Square, and hopefully I'll show you that as well. To me, it's pretty underwhelming, but I think if you've never been there, if you haven't been to Toronto, it might be worth visiting. If you've been to Times Square, then you're kind of going to be disappointed, but so it's still worth the visit. And check that out. So I think that's all I can say about places that I would consider visiting while you're here. If I forget any of them, I will talk about them in my next video, where I will discuss locations and landmarks to visit just outside Toronto. If you have a car, for these places you would need to rent a car. Once you start venturing outside Toronto, the transportation system here is not good. It's not like in some countries where they have a very well mapped out system of transportation for the countryside. Toronto, basically, you need to have a car. There's no way out of it. And for those locations that I would speak about, it would be like parks, more like nature destinations. Hopefully I'll talk about Rattlesnake Point and some other provincial parks that you can visit that will be well worth the visit if you're here for a longer period of time. If you like camping, for example, this part of Ontario down here is very, very good for camping. There are a lot of campgrounds, but you have to book them well in advance. They're quite busy. It never used to be like that, but now, I think because the population of Toronto has grown and people don't live in homes anymore, they live in condos and apartments. They need to go out. And so camping has become a very popular way just to get out of the city, and therefore those campgrounds are usually booked well in advance. Also renting cottages. If you want to rent a cottage, that's another thing you want to do well in advance. So if you're coming to Ontario and thinking, I'd like to experience the cottage life, I'd like to experience what it's like to be on this lake in this provincial park, and you want to rent a cottage, do that ahead of time because they rent out quickly. Because they only have a short season of about 1 or 2 months, so you want to get in there early. So we'll talk a bit about that. The one area I forgot to talk about, which I wanted to talk about, is the beaches. Or what anybody here in Toronto, if you say to them, "Hey, where are the beaches?" they'll tell you, "Well, the beaches is an area, a landmark, a neighborhood just in the east side of the city. At one point in time, it was its own little town, its own little center, and as Toronto grew and grew and grew, it just got swallowed up, and it became like sucked into the whole what's called now the GTA, or the Greater Toronto Area. But the beaches, what's nice about the beaches is that most of Toronto is, how do I say it? the lake of Toronto is, the access to the lake is blocked by the highway. So we have this highway called the Gardiner Expressway, which runs across the city of Toronto. It runs across the city of Toronto. And it basically cuts you off from the lake. So in order to get to the lake, you have to cross this highway. And that, you know, it's not great. And there's been a lot of debate about this. And it's starting to rain, I think. You can tell it's starting to rain. There's been a lot of debate about this. They try to figure out what they can do to handle this, because they can't get rid of that highway. It's essential. It's like there's just way too much traffic, and if they were to get rid of that highway, it would cause complete chaos. Plus that highway, because it's sort of suspended over the city, it's starting to fall apart. So the concrete is falling off, you know, so forth. It's creating a lot of problems, actually, and they haven't been able to figure it out. So, but that highway only stretches so far to, I believe, Eastern Avenue or something like that. And after that, there's no more highway, and access to the lake becomes easy. So the Beaches is a neighborhood that has no highway blocking it to the water. So it's become a very desirable area to live in. And, you know, the homes there are very cottage-like, they're very quaint. So that's really good. And it makes it for a much more nicer experience. So the Beaches is definitely a place you want to visit. There's a boardwalk, you can walk along it. There's Ashridge's Bay, very close by, which you can do some kite flying. And again, if you have kids, it's a wonderful location. Hey, brother. Good to see you, man. If you have kids, it's a great place to take your kids. Let them run around on the sand. There's dog parks there, so if you have a dog and they want to run around, they have off-leash dog parks there. So it's actually quite a great location, just to unwind, get away from the, you know, the hustle and bustle. So the Beaches. I think I'm gonna exit here. If you can see, you know, the rain looks like it might come down. It's starting to thunder. It was nice when I started this video, but you know, the weather's definitely turned, and I think I'm just going to head back for cover. So my next video will be like some of the places that are outside the city that you might want to visit, like I was talking about, like the campgrounds and so forth. I'll give you some tips and landmarks about that. And let me know if I missed anything, if I missed a landmark or a place that you think I should have spoke about but I didn't. And leave a comment, leave a like, or if there's something that, you know, that I should have mentioned or something, please let me know. I always appreciate feedback. Leave a comment. And if you can, subscribe. That will help me and encourage me to make more of these videos while I'm here in Toronto. I don't know how long I'll be here. And I'll continue on and catch up with you in the next video. Okay? So see you for now. Bye.